What's going on out here? This is Venus Love, aka Sora Fan Chick, back with another video about identity, diversity, and representation in Hollywood. And I've been wanting to talk about this one. This one is about identity in Hollywood. For a long time, because I am a black person, I've been thinking that it's important that I talk about identity. And not just about identity among black people, but also, gender identity and sexual identity in Hollywood and how we are represented in Hollywood. I think it's important to make differentiations between different races of people and different identities, especially when it comes to how we're represented in Hollywood, because how we are represented affects how people see us and also affects how we see ourselves. So what led me into wanting to do this video is I've been seeing a lot of divide between mixed people of black heritage and black people on YouTube lately. And there are a lot of people that have said that they do not want mixed people to be considered black. And they don't even want mixed people playing black people in movies or television shows. I will say it's no secret that mixed people tend to be preferred for movie roles, oftentimes because of their fair skin and their hair textures are often regarded as the good black hair, right? And a lot of times these mixed people do tend to kind of hijack movements that are meant for people who are of majority black ancestry, such as the natural hair movement. Many people believe that the preferences for mixed people in the black community has also influenced colorism due to mixed people having lighter skin and thinner hair textures than black people with mostly black ancestry. So the problem is that mixed people are being regarded as the higher form of black people because of their mixed ancestry. And typically I feel like the mixed people that are being excluded from our community, or the mixed people that people have a problem with, are the ones that are mixed with white ancestry. Naturally though, there are black people who are mixed with Asian ancestry, East Asian, Indian, Arabic, Native American, indigenous, all kinds of different black mixtures with other ancestors on the other side. Okay, but there are black people that want to exclude these mixed people from the black community, because the idea is that mixed people are not black, they're mixed. Okay, people want to chant this. This is what I've been seeing, a lot of people saying that mixed people, they're not black, they're mixed, there's a difference. And I do agree that there is a difference between mixed people and black people with mostly majority black ancestry, but I'm not going to say that mixed people aren't black. Okay, in my opinion, I do think that any person that has close to 50% or more black ancestry is black. Okay, and let me explain why. First of all, I want to say that mixed is too vague of a term to define anyone. Okay, and so is the term biracial. It would be nice if we could have a term to fit mixed people. Like, in the Hawaiian Islands, their term for mixed people is hapa. Okay, so if you're like half Hawaiian, half white, they would call you hapa. But we need a term like that in the black community for mixed people. And I was kind of thinking maybe like Afro-American, Afro-Euro-American, something like that. But for me, I just feel like the term mixed is too vague, because it could be anything. It could mean anything, but it doesn't give definition to a person's background historically, ancestrally, culturally. So I personally think it's kind of demeaning when you just say, oh, you're not black, you're mixed. You're basically denying them of their heritage, of their background. And I don't think that's right. It's not even scientifically correct, okay? It's not historically correct. So I have a lot to say about that. But of course, another thing is that I have to mention is that a lot of African Americans are mixed with European ancestry. And if you compare us to African people, we obviously have different features, a different history, a different background, So a lot of Africans might say, well, African Americans are not black, because a large portion, millions of African Americans have European ancestry. And we're talking about there are African Americans with 37% of European ancestry. 37 to about at least 12% of European ancestry. According to researchers, it's even hard to really calculate just how much, because it's a large portion of African Americans with European ancestry, and that's because of slavery, slave rape, and of course, because we live in a more integrated, diverse society. So I think that it's very hard to say that, oh, you're not black because you have just 12% less than I do. It doesn't make any sense when there's a lot of black people who have 12% to almost 37% of European ancestry in their blood. At the same token, I do not believe that the one-drop rule should apply. But what defines the one-drop rule? Okay? Because to me, if the one-drop rule is if you have, let's say, 10% of European blood means you're not really that European. Okay? Even if you have 20%, I really don't consider you that European. You're mostly, predominantly a black person, and you probably have more black features than white features. But when you compare an African American to an African who would have 2% of European, that makes a big difference. It not just in culture, but also when it comes to our racial features. And to be honest, this is why a lot of African Americans are seen as more attractive than Africans, because our features look a little more European. I mean, let's just be honest. And I'm not saying all African Americans have European ancestry, but a large portion, and we're talking about in the millions, have European ancestry. And it plays a role in our features, our skin tone, several different things. So I think that we have to leave room for people to identify with what they identify in regards to their culture, in regards to science, but we also have to set limits. And I think the best limits to set is if you have close to 50% or more African ancestry, then you are, in my opinion, black. But also, if you have 50% or more of white ancestry, you are white. And if you have 50% or close to 50% of both, then there should be a term to define this mixed person without denying both the white and black sides of them. And I was going with Euro-Afro-American, or whatever term we want to give them. But I don't believe we should deny mixed people their black heritage, and I don't think we should limit them from being in the black community. We definitely shouldn't disown them, because I think that it's important for them to be accepted. I mean, they're already not accepted in the white communities, and I think they should be accepted in the white communities, but I also think we should accept them in the black communities, mainly because that is what they are. But at the same time, we should make distinctions, and I'm going to get a little bit into that as to why I think it is important to make distinctions between mixed people and black people, especially when it comes to awards and accolades. Mind you, I must mention that when it comes to defining what is a mixed person, we have to keep in mind that a person isn't black just because both their parents are black. Okay, I have actually run into a person who has two black identified parents, and their grandparents are also black identified, but she ended up having only 58% of African American in her African heritage in her DNA. And that's because her far ancestors, her ancestors from way back 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, were all white. But somewhere between the late 1800s, one of them married a black person, and that person continued marrying black people. So what ended up happening is her earliest ancestors actually come from Europe. All of them do. But her later ancestors are all black. So she ended up having 58% of black heritage. And see, that's what I mean by you can't always determine what an African American person is just by having two black parents. And that's why it's important that we don't disown a person and say they're not black just because they have white in them. We definitely should acknowledge that they have white, but I don't think it's right to say you're not black, you're mixed. We should say you are black and you're white. Okay? You are both. That's what it means to be mixed, to be both. So we need to develop a mindset where we see them as both. And getting back to the accolades part and seeing them as both, I do think it's important also that we acknowledge the mixed person's white side as well. Because if we don't distinguish that they have white in them, a lot of times people will believe that these people's accomplishments are a feat for all black people. And let me get into a little bit about that. Typically, mixed kids tend to have better opportunities because they are mixed. Usually their white families, can grant them privileges that normally a black child or a black son or daughter wouldn't be able to get because their parents are not as privileged. Okay? And this is especially so if the mixed child has a white male as a parent. So the problem is a lot of times people, when comparing the success of a black person and a mixed person, it can be very misleading if you see a mixed person succeeding and you affiliate that with blackness. Oh, well, and then there's a lot of people who use these mixed people to gaslight the causes that black people are fighting for. For example, I've gotten to conversations about, how black men struggle to get good jobs and to succeed in law. And the first thing people say, well, look at Obama, he succeeded. And this is what I mean by people equating mixed people so much with the black community that they forget that the mixed person is also white. Okay? And that's what I think why it is important that we do make distinctions, but I think we should make those distinctions without disowning them. And the best way to do that is to include them in the cultural aspect of things, but make the distinction when it comes to awards, when it comes to accomplishments. Because a lot of mixed people tend to get awards for being the first black person to win something, or the first black person to be president, the first black, and yet that doesn't it doesn't represent the whole community. That's the problem. Because they're mixed, they got where they needed to go. And that's what I have a problem when we conflate mixed people too much with the black community without acknowledging that they are also mixed with white ancestry. So the balance, I think, comes from that. We definitely should respect their culture, respect that this is their background, but we also need to set limits and say, hey, yes, I do think they do have black ancestry. They are deserving of their culture, but their accomplishments is not because they are black. Their accomplishment is not a feat for black people because they have white ancestry. They have white parents. And because of that, they got where they needed to go. And having those white features gave them an edge over a person who is of predominantly black background. And that's why we need to keep that in mind. Otherwise, these mixed people will be used to gaslight our causes. And a lot of times they are. A lot of white people say this black person made it and that black person made it. And this person will be a whole mixed person. This person will have white grandparents and parents helping them along. And that's why we need to be able to have these conversations and say, hey, yes, this person of black ancestry made it, but they have white ancestry. that's strong in their lineage. That's how they made it. Another problem with blending mixed people too much in the same category as us in every area is that they tend to get preferential treatment over Black people for being mixed. And Black people often are ignored or downgraded in favor of their mixed counterparts because of it. And some of these mixed people can be downright racist, seeing themselves as superior because of their supposedly lighter eyes or good hair, and that's another thing. A lot of times they're put on such a high pedestal within our communities that they begin to believe they are the higher form of Blackness because of the features that come from their white side. And that's why it's very important that we create a balance so that things don't become so spiteful towards mixed people, but also so mixed people don't feel like they're so above us that they forget that we are the pure race of people in this category. I just think that if we can create a balance, it'll help everyone have opportunities. Both mixed people, they deserve opportunities, but guess what? Us as Black people with full Black ancestry or with predominantly Black ancestry, we deserve opportunities too. And so I think that if we can, not put mixed people on a pedestal while still accepting them in the community, it'll be great for all of us. And quite frankly, I did talk mostly about mixed people with white ancestry. And even though I am aware that there are mixed Black people with Asian ancestry, mixed Black people with indigenous ancestry, mixed Black people with Arabic ancestry, I'm aware of that. However, the reason why I focus on mixed Black people with white ancestry is because they tend to be the face we see on television, in media, and they tend to be used the most often to gaslight our causes. And so I felt like it's important for people to understand the difference between a mixed person, a Black person mixed with white, versus a Black person with predominantly Black ancestry and Black parents. Okay? It's very important that we understand that. So yeah, I also want to keep in mind that distinctions should be made between African Americans, African descendants of slaves, and first generation Africans in America, as well as other African groups around the world. This is going to be a tough one. The reason why I think there should be distinctions made in Hollywood between African Americans and Africans is because we all have very different histories and we've been affected by different things. And while I think it's great to have any Black person in a film or show, I don't want African or Afro-Brits or Afro-Latinas misrepresenting or disrespecting me and my people. Conversely, I don't want African Americans to be misrepresenting and disrespecting African people or Afro-Latinas or Afro-British people, because I see this very often. Like, for example, with the Harriet Tubman movie that's coming out. A lot of people didn't want her playing in this movie. Some of them didn't want her playing in this movie as Harriet because she's not African American. Other people didn't want her playing in this movie because she's typically disrespectful to Black people. And I know a person here on YouTube, Sora Jen Next, did an entire video about how she thinks about this Afro-Brit person playing Harriet Tubman. I think you guys should go check out that video because I think she made some very interesting points about how us as African Americans, we get so incensed. Oh my God, this British person's playing us, and yet we got a whole ass African American cast playing in Black Panther as Africans. We got, Lawrence Fishburne playing Nelson Mandela. Okay, and quite frankly, I don't think he did that great of a job. His accent was not South African to me in the least. Okay, but that's what I mean by we need to start casting people who respect our culture and us as people. Okay, I'm not one to say, like, I do think that it's okay for an Afro-Brit or an African person to play an African American. Okay, I do think that's perfectly fine. But I just think that if we're going to hire people to play us, they need to know about our culture and they need to respect us. And I feel the same about African Americans, especially who are playing Africans. Because African Americans tend to think it's okay for them to portray African people, but then get upset when other nationalities portray them. And African Americans also tend to feel entitled to African roles, and they don't respect African people enough to portray them properly, nor do they go out of their way to hire African people for African roles. That's what really bugs me. You know, it would be nice if African Americans would go out of their way to say, hey, let's go to Africa. Let's use this money we got from all these movies, go to Africa and hire Africans to be in our movies to play in this African nation. You know, as long as the portrayals are respectful and everything, as long as the person portraying us respects our culture and the way of life, I don't normally have a problem with it, but I do wish that we could expand so that identities, the identities of these people are more understood and not misrepresented. That's the main thing. And, you know, it's the issue in Hollywood, period. You know, a lot of foreigners are taking over what was once, you know, the American Hollywood. You know, it's gotten to the point where you can't find one movie these days without a foreign actor. And I do feel that when it comes to fictional characters, this is okay. But when it comes to historical figures, I just really think there should be more careful consideration. You know, we want to make sure that we have people who understand the history and culture of the person they're portraying. You know, Americans should also be careful of this when we're considering playing people of other nationalities. You know, people mistakenly believe that acting is about being something you're not. That's not really what acting is about. Acting is about depicting or portraying someone. But that person doesn't have to be completely different from you. The job is to portray the character or person in a manner that makes the audience believe that the person is real. That's the purpose of acting. That's the actor's job. Trust me, I took acting in college. It was one of my professions, and I had to learn that. I used to think, oh, I'm gonna take this type of acting role because I want to, you know, challenge my range. But that's not what it comes down to. The purpose is to depict someone in a way that's believable to the audience. So I'd rather a person that's more similar to the character be cast in a role than a person attempting to show off their acting range in a movie without properly understanding the character or having knowledge of the character or person they're portraying. This is just me. This is just me. Speaking of identity, I also want to talk about gender and sexual identity and how there is a lack of diversity regarding that as well. I do think it is important that we make distinctions between certain types of identities and certain types of sexualities in Hollywood. Because, of course, in Hollywood, I feel like they don't represent different sexualities well, okay? There's always the lesbian. There's always the gay guy who's really, really, you know, feminine. There's always the butch lesbian and the femme lesbian. And then the bisexuals are just overly sexualized. And none of them are seen as really in humane ways. And then also I think about, you know, transgender women and cisgender women. And I do think that distinctions should be made between them and Hollywood because we are different in very important ways. And my biggest fear has always been that we will misrepresent each other. You know, trans women will misrepresent cis women if they portray us, and cis women, which we tend to do, and cis men tend to misrepresent trans women. Equally, you know, I think that it's important that both sides are represented fairly. And the best way to do that is by casting trans women and trans men in roles that are geared towards them. You know, instead of casting cis people, why not get trans people? And I also think that in roles that are geared towards us, we should be cast in those roles. Now, I do know that there are not a lot of writers who write transgender stories, but maybe that's what needs to change. Maybe we need to start having people who are writing stories about trans women. And that way there will be more trans women and trans men too who will have potential, opportunities. And that's what really needs to be changed. I think Hollywood is becoming more open to casting trans people and LGBTQIA people in general, but there's still a long stretch, and it's really frustrating. Another thing that's really frustrating is that, and I've seen this a lot, is that in movies there's a lot of stereotyping of LGBTQIA. Like, there's always, the feminine guy who turns out to be gay, the masculine girl who turns out to be gay. And I find these stereotypes frustrating personally, because it creates a narrative that all feminine men are gay and all masculine women are gay as well. And it also creates the narrative that a masculine man could not possibly be gay and a feminine woman could not possibly be gay. It puts an undue pressure that shouldn't even be there. I'm kind of a tomboy myself, and I can tell you how frustrating it is when people always assume that you're gay just for being yourself. I can't tell you how frustrating it is when people slander others and gossip about people, assuming their identities, their sexual identities, just because of their gender expression. We need to get to a point where we understand that gender expression is very different from sexuality, and media should be the form to do that. We definitely need more diverse representation to show that, hey, this person may be expressing their gender this way, but it has nothing to do with their sexuality. And we also need media showing the difference between gender identity and sexuality as well, because there's a lot of ignorant people out here who really think they're one and the same, and they're not. We need to get to a point where we understand this, because I'm gonna tell you, a lot of times with these feminine ideas of like, if a male is feminine, he's gay, or if a girl is masculine, she's gay. When you make assumptions like that, about people being in the closet, which is a very harsh thing to assume, because you're basically assuming someone is being deceptive. And when you disregard how a person sees themselves, it can be damaging to personal relationships and damaging to one's self-esteem. And I think that media tends to portray these people as in the closet all the time, when that's not necessarily the case. So, I really don't like a lot of the interpretations of LGBTQI people, because it's very linear and there's no room for expansion, But that's just me on that take. I think personally they're lacking representation, period. And there needs to be more writers who are willing to tap into the LGBTQIA. And a lot of the times it has to do with, conservative religious backgrounds. Most of the world is still traditional, and a lot of people are very religious. And so it's very hard for movie producers to really give gay storylines. But hopefully that will change in the future, and I think that's why we need to start speaking up about the craziest stereotypes that are pushed in the media and the way that people are being represented in this community. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Do you think that people should be separated when it comes to mixed people and black people? Do you think mixed people shouldn't be in the same category as black people? Do you think there should be a balance? Do you think that trans women and cis women should be identified separately in media? Do you think that trans women and cis women should be able to play each other? Do you think there should be more diverse forms of representation for LGBTQIA people? And do you think Africans and Black Americans should also be separated when it comes to identity in Hollywood? Let me know what you think in the comment section. This is a very, very, very odd topic, I know, to talk about, but I think it's one that people are discussing more and more lately because of, different identities coming to the forefront. All right, it's late and I'm out. Peace out.